Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element, with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, as an adult, music has had a huge impact in my life and creates so many memories that I recognize through music. Well, it turns out that it's just not in adulthood that music creates meaning. Children also have a connection to music with everyday tasks such as brushing your teeth or everyday chores that we used to do as kids. Joining us today is Professor of Music Education at Case Western Reserve University, Lisa Huisman Koops. Now, a lot of her research is in musical parenting and children's musical learning. Thank you so much for joining me today, Lisa.
Thanks so much for having me, Dina.
Now, it's a really interesting topic that we're talking about today, and not one that we've done so far on the show, which I'm very excited to do. Now, can you tell us a little bit about how you sort of came into the research of musical learning and how it impacts parenting?
Sure. Well, I was a music teacher right out of college, so I taught 1st through 5th grade music, and then I went back to graduate school for my master's and doctorate, and I was studying how children teach and learn music in a community in the Gambia, West Africa. And I was really interested to see how they would teach one another music and how they were immersed in music. And at the same time, I was teaching early childhood classes at Michigan State University to parents and caregivers and children birth age 3. And so as I saw the families there and I thought about music learning in the Gambia, I started to wonder more about the motivations that parents have in going to classes. And I wondered if they did the activities at home and what it was like if the parent did the activity instead of the teacher. And then my husband and I had our own child, and I was experiencing parenting at home. And so I started to turn my research towards that topic and finding out more about how parents use music in everyday life.
So I really love how it sounded like you started, especially taking it from a exploration point of view rather than just going straight into research, and then sort of seeing the research afterwards and how that really does have an impact on a child's learning and sort of exploring and understanding about the world. So no, it's such a great way to start an aspect of research that we haven't really had a lot of conversation on in terms of musical therapy and things like that as well. So I wanted to maybe get some of your interests and maybe some recommendations before we go ahead and get started on the topic today. The first off, do you have a favorite book that you could share with us?
I do. And my family actually listened to this as an audiobook while we were on a car trip that took 3 days each way. We drove from Ohio to New Mexico, so it was 24 hours of driving each way. And we listened to this audiobook called Cheaper by the Dozen. It's a book about a family in the United States in the early 1900s, and they have 12 children. And there's so much music happening in the family. They talk about rolling the rugs back and having dance parties with their records when the records were the technology of the day. Or when they were in the car together, they would sing songs and they would sing soprano and alto in different lines. And it's a really funny book and it's a really funny audiobook, but it was also great to listen to when we were on our road trip, and then to think about how we use music during road trips and during other parts of life too.
I love the film Cheaper by the Dozen. I actually didn't know that they had a book or they had audiobooks when it comes to the film, because I think I saw the Hilary Duff version of it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. I didn't actually know that they did a book, that it originally started as a book.
And it's a real family. The book was written by 2 of the siblings, and it's so interesting. Oh, wow. Their parents were both engineers, and it's wonderful. It's a great read from a family dynamic standpoint.
Okay, well, I'm going to have to add that to my list. And I definitely mean it this time, because I think I say that quite often on the show. But no, that's definitely something, because I love family dynamics and sort of that area. And I love the way that that film sort of presents that. So now, knowing that it is based on a true story and based on the real life experience, I'm definitely going to be looking into that now.
Yeah.
Now, how about movies? Do you have a favorite film, or maybe a film that's just come out that you sort of really want to talk about?
Well, actually, could I do a TV series?
Yes.
Okay,
TV series are always considered.
The new version of Percy Jackson came out in the US. I think it came out around the holidays, and it became this family favorite for all 4 of our kids. And my husband and I all enjoyed it. And every week we would gather in the back room to watch it together. So I loved it. And there was this one scene that really struck me where Grover is helping to resolve a conflict between Percy and Annabelle. What's her name?
Annabeth? I think it's Annabeth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Percy and Annabeth are having this conflict, and Grover starts singing this song, and they both look at him like, what is going on? And he kind of expresses, well, this is this song that in I don't know if it's his family or his friend group, like we sing this song when there's a problem, and it helps us to work through our problems. And I just thought that's parenting musically right there. So that's my favorite.
No, I love the way that they did that, and it shows how different families are sort of dealing with conflict in different ways as well. Because the way that Grover sort of deals with it, and the way that his family deal with it, is just sing a song, and hopefully the conflict would just resolve itself, and that you could think about things rationally rather than think about things emotionally. So, no, I love the way that they sort of did use that as a parenting dynamic or family dynamic exploration.
Yeah.
Now, how about podcasts? Do you have a favorite podcast that you could share with us?
I do. Every Tuesday morning, I listen to Ask Lisa. It's a parenting podcast with Dr. Lisa D'Amour, who's a psychologist and author, and Rena Ninan. And it's so wonderful. They are super practical, super compassionate. It's all very much based in research literature. Dr. Lisa D'Amour is a fantastic researcher and psychologist. And she also has a beautiful voice. So it's a great parenting voice to have in your head. So in moments of crisis, I just kind of think, what would Dr. Lisa be saying right now? So I highly recommend it. Yeah,
I absolutely love that. I love the way that some podcast hosts have that voice that's just like, it's fit for podcast. It's fit for like just hearing constantly in your head, and sort of remind you that things can get better, that everything is just temporary, and you actually want to listen to it as well. So no, I love those kind of voice. So what are the areas that this podcast sort of typically focuses on?
They respond to questions that people write in. And so it's mostly, I would say, kids more 10 to 20-year-olds, not so much early childhood, but it can be things about friendship. It can be about school, about health, about sleep, about relationships between the parents and the children. And they're very, very affirming and explain what research is related to the topic at hand, but then also make it personal. And it's terrific.
You know, that's a really great thing. I love the combination of actual practices and things that they do at home as well with their own kids. So I think that definitely sets it apart a little bit more. Now, to start off with, I know that everyone has a very different definition as to what family is and what sort of creates a family. What would your definition of a family be?
Dina, that's such a beautiful question. And I think you're right that everyone does have their own definition, that it's really personal. And it's actually something I thought about because if I have a new book, and I did not wear yellow on purpose, that was an accident. It's called A Family Guide to Parenting Musically. But in some ways, I wish I could have called it A Family, and then in parentheses in the title say, and by that I mean parents, children, siblings, grandparents, step-parents, bonus parents, neighbors, aunts, uncles, friends, Guide to Parenting Musically, because I really see the family myself as this circle around us. And there's people who are always part of the family, you know, the parents, the grandparents, the aunts and uncles, the siblings. But then I think it kind of moves and grows at different points in our lives. And we have people that join our family for a while that become very important to us and walk with us maybe through a crisis. And then we kind of join other families when they need us. So it's almost these bubbles that are moving around and growing and joining. And it's very, I view it very fluid.
No, I'm the same. And I think that's a great definition for it as well, because I think it's not just two parents sort of raising a child. It's like it's other family members, but it's not just family members. It could be a teacher that sort of comes in and stays with you for a year and just sort of connects with your child for a year, because you forget that the children are with their teacher 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours, 6 to 7 hours a day, 5 days a week. That's going to create some impact as to how the connection between what you're raising your kids to be and what the teacher is raising your kids to be as well. Like that's going to have an impact. And I think we forget that as well. It's not just that you and family and relatives raising, it's you and a community sort of raising a child. And community has a huge impact as to how a child is going to be seeing the world, is going to understand the world. And honestly, I feel like if just two parents are sort of raising the child or one parent, I think it's going to get such a small-minded view as to how the world works. So if you don't have that community aspect or that education aspect or the teachers sort of coming in, you don't have those different perspectives that the child is going to get to see, because you can't fulfill every aspect of the child's world. There's so many other people that fulfill the child's world as well. And I think it has a huge impact on what the child is going to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And also it has a big impact on the adults, because as an adult, when I have these other people who are on the team helping, that's such a good feeling. And if I'm trying to do everything myself, I can't, of course.
Yeah. Especially if you're not just raising one child, you're raising 3 or 4 different children who are very different as well. And I think like you're going to have an impact on one of those one children more than the others, but because the others are going to find other aspects where they sort of find that connection with as well. Whether it could be the sports coach, it could be an art teacher, it could be anyone that sort of shares that similar view, because you're not going to have the same viewpoint as every child.
Exactly.
As all of those children. So I think having that mentorship, I think, is a huge impact on how the child is going to understand the world as well.
Definitely.
Now, I think when it comes to position that family holds in today's society, do you think that it still holds the same importance as it has done in previous decades?
That's such an interesting question. And I think it really depends on specific cultures. And I'd love to learn more about the families in your community and what you're seeing. I think, since COVID was such a big reset for families all around the globe. And that became a time where often it was just that very small family unit for us. And I think that was pretty universal, that people were sheltering in place for a certain amount of time. And maybe that's part of this expansive idea of family, that after being like just the 6 of us, recognizing that need. But I think family continues to be more important than ever because the world is so complicated. Kids need really strong families in that expansive sense, so that they are learning and navigating this complicated world from a place of safety and security.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a huge impact. That's a huge impact, and I think we sort of neglect that as well, especially being, like you said, after COVID, everyone was so focused on just the 4 members in the household, or the 4 to 6 members in the household, whoever was living with you. And then suddenly it's like, well, you're so sick of that person or that group of family now that you're sort of reaching out to other people, because we need that connection with people that are, I think, similar to us. And I think when it comes to kids and parents as well, you're not going to find a child who's very similar to that parent, because they're going to be either opposing views or very different as to what their interests are. So when it comes to like when sports clubs opened back up again, or when all those other groups, so that are so impactful in society, I think, opened up again. Everyone was so focused on finding a hobby straight after COVID because we needed that connection with other people.
Absolutely.
Now, we talk about music in today's episode, and I want to know a little bit more about how music has such a huge contribution to having that harmony within a family dynamic.
Yeah, and I love how you use the word harmony in the question. So when I was thinking about how to answer this, one of the ideas that I've learned from my research is thinking about music as something that people do. And that comes from a musicologist, Christopher Small, who was born in New Zealand, and he worked in England and in Spain. And he coined the term musicking, meaning music is something we do, music making. And it had a really big impact on music education at the time, because at the time, some music educators said, music is this thing that we need children to appreciate. And then those that were listening to Christopher Small said, no, music is something we do. Music is an activity that we teach children to engage in. And it can be singing, dancing, listening, creating, setting up a stage, organizing the microphones. Everything that goes into it is musicking. So then with my research with families, when I looked at musicking, I started to realize some of it was relational and some of it was more practical. So the relational musicking would be asking their grandma what music she listened to when she was a teenager and then finding it online and listening to it together, or singing a lullaby to a baby. But singing a lullaby is also practical if it soothes the baby and helps the baby get to sleep. Another practical one is the toothbrush. We were talking about the toothbrush earlier. So you had a toothbrush that played music for the amount of time that you needed to brush your teeth. Is that right?
Yes.
And so you were motivated to brush your teeth and you kept brushing. And a lot of kids don't brush long enough. So that was a very practical use of music to keep you brushing and to occupy you and that kind of thing. So when we think about music in family life and how it adds harmony, I think about music as being something we do together, that musicking idea from Christopher Small. I think about how it includes reminders in it. So sometimes there might be a song that reminds us, you know, we're going to wash our hands, we're going to wash our hands or whatever. So it reminds us what we're supposed to be doing. And it's personal, so everyone can incorporate whatever music they like. And that's something that's really important to me, that families hear every family can be musical and there's many ways to be musical, and incorporate the music that you like and that's important to you as a family. So I wouldn't want to come on and like say, here's a playlist you should use at your home, because just because I like the music doesn't mean you and your kids like the music, or the people in your house like it. And also, I think music is something that draws us closer to ourselves and helps us know who we are as people. It can draw us closer to nature. It can draw us closer to people around the world if we listen to music from another culture around the world, a way to get to know people and to one another, to the divine. So there's so many ways that music connects us and can be that relational and that practical. So involving it in the home.
Yeah. So why does it have a huge impact on children then? Like more specifically, I know it has an impact on me as an adult, but why, when I listen to a song from my childhood, for example, any Disney song that sort of comes on, I really connect it with with me being an adult. Why does it have that impact on a child?
Yes, another great question. I'm actually going to grab a quote because I want to make sure I say this correctly.
Perfect.
There's researchers who have examined exactly what you talked about. Like, why does this music bring me back to my childhood? And why, when I hear this song, all of a sudden I'm in the back seat of this old car riding on the highway with my brothers and we're eating fruit roll-ups. Like, there's so many sensory details in the memory. And so researchers call that music-evoked autobiographical memories. Music-evoked autobiographical memories. And they say that the musical memories are often vivid and they often include positive emotions. So I just think about this idea of planting those seeds for children so that they will be able to look back and have these positive, vivid memories when the music comes back on. Like, so maybe when they're in college and they're stressed out, they could have a playlist that includes some of the music we listened to when they were younger. And it would bring them back to that more relaxed time and help them to kind of breathe a little bit and de-stress a little bit. I had a research participant who said, she got kind of choked up when she said it, if my son someday, this song comes on, he's having a rough time, he's on his own, he's an adult, and this song comes on and he remembers how we danced in the kitchen to it. And it gives him strength. Like she just said, that would be so meaningful to me. And so I realized, and it doesn't have to be these lofty, like far, far away things. It could be something we do today and then we bring it back tomorrow and the kids have this happy memory that we danced yesterday and we're dancing again, or we danced yesterday and now we have this on while we're cleaning the house or that kind of thing. And there's also some beautiful research around ideas of music participation, listening while you're doing music making, something called entrainment. Like if you're doing a rhythm at the same time as someone else, even children as young as toddlers, if they've done a rhythmic activity with a parent, Laura Sorelli is a researcher in Toronto, and she found that the toddlers were more helpful to the parent if they had done a beat activity together than if they had not done the musical activity. So music, we don't want to think about, let me redo this. So the Mozart effect is something a lot of people have heard of, and a lot of people have probably heard that it's been debunked, that it's not something that lasts a long time or that can be replicated. But we do have good studies that show and have been replicated that music impacts certain areas of development, certain areas of the brain, certain experiences. And I think more important than that, families can think about how music has impacted them, as you've been sharing some of your stories, and then also try it with their kids. Like, try putting on this music. Does it help the kids calm down? No? Then try this other music. Or what happens if I sing a song while we're buckling in the car seat? Am I more calm as a parent? I am. That's great. So I think to be researchers ourselves as parents and test out the research that we're hearing can be great.
No, I think it's great because like the minute that you said that, it sort of reminds me of the song Ain't No Man High Enough, and that I completely listened to as a child when it was either on a road trip or dancing around in the kitchen. And the minute you say that, I was just completely reminded of every single time I get stressed out, that's the first song that comes on the playlist. And I'm dancing around the kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning baking cookies. But that's like the song that sort of comes on where I'm like completely stressed out. And that's the only song that has been known to completely get me out of my own brain for 3 minutes or however long the song goes on for. And that's the thing that calms me down almost immediately. So the amount of impact that music has on me is actually, I can't even describe it, but it's that connection that you have to a memory of when, like you said, life was a little bit easier or life was a little bit more of the happy moments. But I sort of wanted to ask, and sort of contrast to that, if there are songs that sort of have that negative impact and that a child, is that sort of works the same way as like, it takes a child back to an unhappy memory or a moment that they don't want to remember?
I would think so, yes. I haven't read research specifically on that, but I think anecdotally, I can think of songs myself, from a scary movie, or if it was playing when I got some bad news. I think I do that with tastes too, with certain foods. If there was a certain food and then something bad happened, it does. I think you're right that it goes both ways.
Okay. Because I think like you said, there's not a lot of research for that. But when it comes to that, I sort of wonder if it's sort of like a muscle memory kind of thing as well, where you're sort of connected with something, whether it's good or bad, happy or sad moment, that sort of works in both ways.
Yeah. Well, and I think the research on music cognition is so interesting too, about what is it in a certain song that often people might feel really hopeful when they hear it, or really sad, or, like how that kind of triggers things and strums the heartstrings in different ways. There's a lot of really interesting. Yeah.
So in what ways does incorporating music into a daily life reinforce the structure for a lot of children sort of going through that routine?
Yes. Well, I wanted to bring up another set of ideas from my research. So I had the practical and the relational, and then I'm going to go like this way now so you can imagine it on a grid. Okay. Another set of ideas would be parenting musically and musical parenting. So whichever word comes first is the idea that we're stressing. So musical parenting is focused on the music, and parenting musically is focused on the parenting. And we've been talking mostly about parenting musically so far. So like using music to calm, using music to connect. But there is also the whole area of parents doing things to help their children learn music. And we would call that musical parenting. So going to a class, taking lessons, maybe saying, I'm going to introduce you to all of Michael Jackson this summer, or I want you to learn all of the Disney songs, or, like really focused on the music. And when it comes to the ideas of structure and predictability, I think we can do things both with the parenting musically and with the musical parenting that help the kids. So as far as the music itself, music has structure and music is predictable. And that's, some music cognition experts think that's why people like music so much, because you can expect what's going to happen. And then either it happens and you think like, oh, great, it happened. Or if there's a twist and it doesn't happen, then your brain thinks, ooh, I thought something was going to happen. It didn't happen. So giving kids that gift, I mean, music is great. It's such a great part of life, this life that we're all living, that we've all been doing for all these centuries and millennia. Giving them the opportunity to hear even Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, like what is the structure of that? There's this part of it, and then there's something different, and then the beginning comes back again, or the predictability of it. Every time I sing it, the same thing happens. Oh, but now they changed some words. That's different, or that kind of a thing. Gives some of the structure and the predictability from the music itself. One of my favorite examples of a parenting musically application is something I learned from a teacher. And in her classroom, she would say, make a circle, don't be late. By the time I count to 8, 1, 2, etc., up to 8. And I started doing it at home with my kids, and I'd say, wash your hands and don't be late, or put on your shoes and don't be late, and just fill in whatever it was that they needed to do. And that gave my son the predictability of knowing how long it took me to count to 8. So he could, if he needed to like finish, one little puzzle piece or put up a magnet block or whatever, he knew he had this amount of time, but then he would accomplish the task within the amount of time. And I think those kinds of like little things give kids a sense of security, but I think they also take a little bit of burden off the parent, because then it's, in a way, it's the music that's doing the work of motivating the child to do what you are asking them to do, rather than you being like, come on, this is it, and like explaining what I need you to do, or here's why I need you to do it. If you could just say like, meet me in the bathroom and don't be late. So we had a lot of fun with that.
No, that's really good. That's a really great way. I think I love the differentiation between parenting musically and musical parenting, because the difference, it works two different ways. It uses it to teach a child something, but it also uses it to instruct them or to have that structure. When you're sort of talking about the parenting part, the structure part to it and the predictability, it sort of reminds me of those Jack in the Box sort of like turn things. So it's like the music comes on, the minute it's going to go pop is the music, the minute the music stops. And that's like sort of a predictable thing that you have every single time it happens. But still, decades down the line, it's still some of the most entertaining ways to have that predictability of music, because you're still, even as an adult, when I still do it, I'm like, I know what's going to happen, but it's still entertaining to do it. Like even now, every time I find a Jack in the Box, I'm sort of just like, oh, let's go see what's going to happen this time, as if I'm not really expecting the same thing.
Well, and I think that gets to control too, that I think is so important for kids. There's this idea of agency, which is a term referring to power, control, and authority. And one of my professors in graduate school, when I was doing the work with the Gambian children, I said, it seems like it's really important to them to have control over their music making. And he said, of course, that is important, because when you think about it, children are probably the group of people in the world who have the least amount of agency overall. So anytime a child has an opportunity to have some agency or control, that's really important to them. And so the child turning the jack-in-the-box maybe has chosen how quickly to turn it, because then they're controlling what's going to happen. And I think that's important to keep in mind with all of the inclusion of music in parenting, is like, how can we provide opportunities for the children to have control, or for the children to take opportunities to lead the musicking.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to, I think you're talking a little bit more earlier about sort of letting your child sort of explore different musical instruments to sort of take place. How do you encourage them? How would you sort of encourage them to test out different musical instruments? Because I know if a child doesn't want to learn guitar, there's always going to be piano or other music items. How would you sort of encourage a child to explore those different options?
Well, the first thing I would do is to model it and to help them see other people playing instruments and learning instruments. So when we would have babysitters come when our kids were younger, we would ask them to bring their instruments along and to play for the kids, so they could see people closer to their age playing instruments. Mm-hmm. And if someone, if we knew a neighbor who was learning guitar and just starting to learn, we would visit so that our kids could see, like, this is something we do throughout our lives. It's not just when you're a child, but you can do this throughout your life. I've heard a lot of families who say, if we're going to try an instrument, we want to try for at least a year. And I think that is generally good advice if you're taking lessons or that kind of thing, so that you recognize it's a really hard thing. And it would be, I would say this to my kids, it would be really surprising if you could just play this really hard instrument without working at it. So it's really normal if you try it and it's so hard. It's okay. That's normal. And I love that they can have that experience, because then as they go through life and they do other things that are difficult, they can realize, oh, I'm not doing something wrong if this is hard. It's just that it's hard, so I'll keep going. So there's the modeling, there's the, putting a time frame around it and like stick it out even if it's hard. And then there's so much online now that can help kids to learn, which I think is great because it provides a lot of access. So a ukulele is not very expensive. It's about $50 in the United States. And then there's lots that they can learn online. It would be great for parents and kids to learn side by side. Mm-hmm. And then, maybe the child learns a new chord and can teach the parent. So those are some of the ways I'd encourage families.
So it sort of has that bond sort of created between the parent and the child as well, in a musical sense, which is not so, it sort of separates the I'm your parent, so I have to tell you what to do kind of approach to parenting. It sort of creates that, okay, yes, I'm your parent, but also we're doing something together. We're sort of having that time where I'm learning something new, you're learning something new at the same time.
Yeah, Dina, you just came up with one of the most, I think, magical moments that I've heard parents speak about when they're engaged with music with their child and they're no longer parent and child, but they're co-learners or co-musicers, or they're people together. And I've heard parents say it's such a breath of fresh air, even if it just occurs for 2 minutes or 30 seconds or whatever it is, that the parent isn't like, I have an agenda, I need you to do this, I'm in charge, I'm watching over, like all of this. But if they just let go and they're dancing together, they're singing together, they're playing together, it's wonderful because it connects them in a different way. And I think that's one of the great gifts music can give us.
Yeah, we neglect that quite a lot, especially when like busy schedule sort of comes up. And now I think my mom and I, every time she comes back to see us, we're always just listening to music and sitting on the sofa, or we're listening to a new album, like Taylor Swift album that just come out. We'll be listening to that when it comes out. And so like music definitely has that way of connecting the two of us now in an adult way, sort of maintaining that parent and child relationship, but not really forcing that connection. It's sort of just gravity sort of just takes place, and we just allow each other to create that space for ourselves, which I think is even better than just sort of, okay, I listen to this separately and then talk about it afterwards.
Yeah, that's beautifully said.
Now, we're going to move on to the practice and habit part of the show.
Okay.
This is one of my favorite areas because it always talks about the practice that you would recommend for parents. Now, what is a practice that you would recommend for parents to integrate music, to have that connection and maybe promote that nurturing environment within that family dynamic?
All right, so I'm going to ask your listeners to be a little patient here. I don't want to give you something super specific. I'm going to give you something that's more of a fill in the blank so each family can make it their own. So my idea for a practice is you choose a parenting scenario where you want to bring a little sparkle or a little ease. So it could be diapering, it could be siblings bickering, it could be getting out the door and into the car, buckling the car seat. It could be homework time. So think of a scenario where you'd like to bring a little ease, a little sparkle, and then think about what your strength as a person is when it comes to music. Not everyone's comfortable with singing, so you don't have to be singing for this. You might choose a piece of recorded music, you might rap, you might chant, like make a circle, that's chanting. It could be dancing. So whatever the listener's strength is, and you bring it together with a scenario and make a plan. So if I was going to say, okay, the scenario is when my kids start to bicker and pick on each other. And then one of my strengths is choosing music for the occasion and dancing. Then I'll put that together and I'll have a plan and I'll be watching. And then when they start to fall apart, I'll say, everybody to the living room. And I'll have, the speaker and the music ready to go. And we'll put on the music. We'll have a dance party. And they'll be kind of surprised, like, well, this is new. What's going on? But we'll jump around, we'll dance, and then we'll make it move and freeze. So there's an element of child control. So the child can be pausing on the phone or the device. And then I'll freeze when they pause it. So suddenly they're controlling me. We'll take turns doing that. And this is very important. We'll practice it and get it set up while we're calm. It's very hard to add something into parenting, I think, if the crisis is already happening or the tension is already there. So practicing it while you're calm. And you could even say to everybody, okay, so we're going to try this new thing. Just so you know, if I ring this bell, or if you hear me say, everybody to the living room, come to the living room. And you wouldn't have to say to the kids, it's because you're bickering, blah, blah, blah. But you could just say, let's just practice. So when you hear me ring the bell, come to the living room, and then they all come and we practice it. So that when it actually happens, you've already thought it through and practiced. And then you're like, okay, this is it. Here we go. It's go time.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a really great way of sort of relieving tension, I think, especially individual tension. I think not just tension within the family, but everyone sort of has that day where they're just not feeling so good. Especially the children, especially parents as well. It sort of like relieves that hecticness and just sort of brings you back to, okay, I don't have to take things seriously at this moment in time. I can deal with whatever I need to deal with a little bit later. But right now, just actually stand here and enjoy what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's, of course, so many ways to tailor it to the situation and to the family.
Mm-hmm. So do you do this with your family as well?
It has been a while, but we definitely did dance parties when they were younger. So I can't remember if I said my kids are currently 18, 13, 11, and 9. And yeah, in those early years, there were a lot of dance parties in the kitchen, in the living room. Let's have a dance party.
It definitely changes. I think it definitely makes an impact. As I grew up with my mom and my sister, we would constantly be doing that. That would constantly be our thing. Just dancing in the kitchen, sometimes at 1 o'clock in the morning. Majority of the times I think it was 1 o'clock in the morning. If all of us were just not having the greatest day, that's what we would do. And then our dad would walk in and just be like, you guys okay? Like, are you all right? He was a sensible one in the family. So he was always just making sure that everything's okay. But yeah, the way that the three of us, I always know every time I'm in the kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think back to that moment. I think back to baking cookies at 1 o'clock in the morning. And somehow I end up like, I'm going to start baking cookies at 1 o'clock in the morning now too, because it's just something that I used to do. But yeah, the amount of connection that you sort of have. And I think a TV show that I recently just finished rewatching, Ginny and Georgia, they used to have dance parties in their living room whenever things got difficult, and they just dance to whatever is going on and just completely forget the world exists for that little bit in time. And I love the way that that's sort of represented in case of like, I thought it was just my family, but no, it seems to be a common thing.
Yeah.
It's really interesting how it sort of just tags into like, oh, most families actually do this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and that's interesting because in my research, so my first book, which is called Parenting Musically, I followed 8 Cleveland area families for a year, and I spent time with them once a month. And when I was recruiting them and explaining the study, several families said, well, we're happy to participate, but we really don't do much music. And I said, okay, well, let's just give it a try. And they did tons of music. They were like, there was so much music. But I think sometimes life is so hectic that we don't even realize what we're already doing. So to your point, that you didn't, maybe families don't realize everyone does this. I think a lot of families are already doing a lot of the things that we're talking about today. And it's kind of nice to stop and think like, I do that. And we listen to music in the car and we have playlists and I sing lullabies and like, I'm doing a good job, like pat on the back. And that's actually, there's a research term for it. It's intuitive parenting, when parents are doing these wonderful, enriching things without even realizing it. So I like to mention that too. So parents give themselves credit. And then when they realize it, my participants would say, oh, there's so much music happening. And maybe it was a little bit more because they were aware of it, but I think they just realized they were doing it. And then they saw their children doing it too, singing while they were doing Legos or making up little songs, and then the parents would appreciate it and join in on their musical creativity.
Yeah. It's so interesting as well because my partner, he doesn't listen to music just by choice because he's not grown up sort of with that impact of how music is. So whenever he's in my car and I'm driving, I'm always having a song on just to sort of keep me sane for that little bit that I'm driving. He doesn't. So it's very interesting listening to a car filled with music and a car that's very quiet. And I'm like, how does your brain not like want to explode when you're not listening to something in driving? Because like it calms me down with the amount of hecticness at the road, that you're driving with people that are crazy on the road, and suddenly you're just like, I'm listening to Taylor Swift. I'm good.
Yeah. I love car stories and music.
Yeah.
Hearing about what people in the car.
So this leads us really well into the last section of the show, which is the open mic. Now, this gives you a chance to talk about anything that you are passionate about, or maybe something that we didn't get to talk about throughout the show. So in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and share what's on your mind with us today.
Oh, thanks so much, Dina. Well, I wanted to share that I have a podcast as well, and it's called Parenting Musically. And it has been really fun for me. I've gotten to talk with people like Ziggy Marley, who's an artist, and Maggie Baird, who's Billie Eilish and Phineas's mom. And they tell me about musical parenting, about their own musical upbringing. And then each episode is paired with a music education researcher. So I mentioned Laura Sorelli earlier, and I have an episode where Rodney Crowell and Chelsea Crowell were talking about her baby and playing music for her baby. They're artists. And then Laura talked about her research about infants' musical perception and that kind of thing. So I would love to invite families to check out the podcast and enjoy the stories from the artists and the researchers.
Oh, I love that. I love that it's such a great connection between everyone, and everyone has their own different stories when it comes to music and how they sort of grew up and how they parent. So no, definitely go and check out that podcast, and definitely comment below if you've gone to see it, because it's definitely something I would recommend as well. Now, thank you so much, Lisa, for coming on to the show today and for talking about this and introducing this whole idea to our listeners today. I don't think, if you haven't heard about this idea, then definitely go and research it a little bit more, or definitely go and check out some of Lisa's work as well. If our audiences would like to know a little bit more about your research, is there a place that I can send them to?
Sure. If they look at Parenting Musically podcast on social media, or if they Google Parenting Musically podcast, that has links to the podcast and also has links to my bio that has more of my research and my books.
Oh, perfect. Well, I'll definitely have that link down below for anyone who's interested. Now, thank you again, Lisa, for coming on to the show today. It was amazing having you on and getting to talk about this.
Thank you so much, Dina. I really enjoyed it.
And I hope you guys learned as much as I did. I'll see you all in the next episode.
You've been listening to All Together, the Family Science Insights podcast, produced by the Family Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at fa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.